Okay, so we're going to be going over a hand from PokerStars. This is 25 cent, 50 cent, $50 max buy-in. We are 7 max, playing on the button against a small blind open raise. Quick stats on the opponent. VPIP, so voluntarily put money in the pot 20% of the time. Percent raise 12, 3-bet 5. Pretty tight aggressive regular. We've played 19,000 hands with this opponent. Have a little bit of a feel for them, but they're a pretty good fundamental player. So, just quickly facing a raise here, King, Queen, offsuit. Interestingly, looking at PIO solver, it's giving that one a call 100% of the time. I would think that would be a 3-bet, but I guess it's just one of those hands that it's not quite strong enough to 3-bet for value, and while you do have blockers, it doesn't necessarily make sense as a bluff. So it kind of just makes sense to go ahead and call and go ahead and play, knowing that King Queen is going to be pretty strong against your opponent's range. Like a good player is going to be open raising with a pretty wide range here. So we go ahead and call and go to the flop. So 2-3 Queen. 2 hearts on the board, obviously. The queen obviously connects very well for us. Kind of an interesting spot, I guess, as far as the villain's range and what they may have, because they have such a wide range. There's not a lot you can discount here. They could have pocket queens, they could have ace queen, they could have pocket twos, pocket threes, they could have heart draws, and then obviously they could have a whole lot of junk that just missed. Or like even those backdoor flush draws in terms of maybe they do have like the ace of hearts, or they have 2 diamonds, or they have king jack offsuit, something like that. So we know their range is very wide, and we know that we're going to be calling here more often than not. I don't think it necessarily makes sense to raise to try to get protection out of flush draw. I think you kind of want to call. In position, I like to, with a strong hand, I like to kind of let the opponent kind of act first and see how they're going to behave moving forward. So villain goes ahead and bets. This is what, about 3/4 pot probably. So they make a pretty sizable bet here, and I think this polarizes their range, right? So whenever someone's making a big bet like this, they're generally going to be doing it with hands that are very strong, and then also with bluffs. So it kind of interesting from that standpoint that this is the sizing they go with. Again, like I said, I've played a fair amount of hands with this player. I think good player. So we could say they may have pocket kings, pocket aces. They may have ace queen. They could have a set, but they also could have some draws in their range. But again, the only draws here are likely going to be heart draws. Given that I'm playing against a polarized range, and I don't think a raise is really going to get them to back off with anything other than a pure bluff. And if my opponent is just giving a pure bluff, like they're running pretty much dead, I'd rather just call and see what develops moving forward, because if I raise a bluff, they're just going to fold out. But if I call a bluff, I give them the chance to bluff again, right? So I'm going to go ahead and call right here, go to the turn card, obviously, great. We hit 2 pair, and the opponent, who, because they have more pocket queens and pocket kings in their range, they kind of have a range advantage on this board, right? Because they should have had the stronger starting hand, or at least those top end hands are more a part of their range than they are mine. However, because I have the queen and the king, there's only 2 queens and 2 kings left in the deck, which means that there's only 1 combination of pocket queens and 1 combination of pocket kings, whereas there are still 6 combinations of pocket aces left, which, like I said, are still in the opponent's range. Queen, king, 1 combination of that left. Right, all right, no, actually a few combinations of that left. Pocket 2 stack, pocket 3 is also in their range, but I don't know, I guess I'm feeling pretty good they're not. So anyway, villain goes ahead and bets again, and they're continuing with a big bet, which is interesting because they're betting as if the board didn't just change, right? So like they bet big on the flop, and now this turn card is not a blank, and they're betting big again, meaning it's likely that nothing changed in terms of their perceived strength, right? So that signals to me that they're very strong, but again, because I have two pair, and it's just so hard for them to have those sets, it's like I'm feeling very good about my hand here, and I think that I hate to put people on one specific hand, but it feels a lot like pocket aces in one of those spots where they're just trying to get value. Now, I don't think this bet makes a lot of sense if you have. I mean, it makes some sense if you have pocket aces, but if you have pocket aces and I call the flop bet, like you're just trying to get value out of those one pair type hands. Like maybe I have pocket eights or sevens, or maybe I have like queen 10 or something like that, and you're trying to get value out of it. You might want to bet a little bit smaller. They opt to go on the larger end, and again, they may be doing this as a protection bet. That's kind of the way I read it. Is more likely than not, it's a very strong hand who's worried about getting outdrawn by a flush filling in here. So they want to try to get value and back me off those weaker drawing hands. But like I said, I think I put this opponent on like a very strong range, so I opt to go ahead and raise here and see what they do. Opponent goes ahead and jams. I call. I don't think there's a lot to consider here. Like if you run into a set, you run into a set. That's just bad luck. That's unfortunate. But there's more combinations of pocket aces than there are pocket queens and pocket kings combined. Those smaller sets are still in the opponent's range. I think a lot of people will just limp with pocket twos and pocket threes from the small blind. People don't tend to play them as aggressively. Like they're not going to open raise 100% of the time there, although I probably should. But anyway, I feel pretty comfortable getting it in here and hoping my opponent has ace king or something like that. Obviously, the way the board filled out wouldn't be great if the opponent did have a heart draw. The opponent did not have a heart draw. I think this is a pretty good example of someone overvaluing their pocket aces a little bit. Whenever I raise the turn, they may be thinking, oh, he may be trying to bluff me off with a draw, trying to exercise some fold equity. That makes sense, but ultimately I think, if you think I'm playing a draw, you may just want to call and then see what develops on the river as opposed to jam, because I don't know if he was even pricing me out at that point. He might have been, though. But anyway, it was, also the pocket aces here, you don't have any real ability to. Well, you have ability to improve by hitting a set. There still are two aces left in the deck. You also could counterfeit me if a 2 or a 3 hit the board. So you have 6 outs there, about 8 outs in total. So, I looked at Poker Tracker. I think the villain had 18% equity on the turn, and that's that's their range. That's going to be their equity against most strong raising ranges. So whenever you think about what the opponent's doing there, they're raising against a range that consists of like 2 pair and better, in which case you have 18% equity, and flush draws, against which you probably have closer to like 80% equity, depending if I have a gut shot there as well or what. But the opponent, it's also worth noting, like if the opponent had the ace of hearts, they may be less inclined to jam there because they would be blocking my heart draws, making it less likely I have a heart draw. Here they don't have the ace of hearts, so they may think I have like an ace of hearts draw. Just to note, and not that this opponent would necessarily know this, but if I'm facing an open raise from the small blind and I'm in the big blind, I'm playing a suited ace, I'm going to be raising it. I'm going to be 3-betting that because suited aces are great 3-betting hands whenever you're facing a late position raise. Again, he might not know that, so he may still put me on that range. But yeah, I mean, just kind of fortunate here that you get a good value hand on the turn and your opponent has like exactly the hand you hope to get value out of. It was possible that the opponent had ace king there because they may want to just kind of put that big semi-bluff in on the flop because, I started strong and let's see what happens. And they hit the king and they think, okay, now I got my value hand. I'm going to try to put more money in, and then I raise and they may be thinking, oh, well, what do you really have here? Do you have a draw? Do you have this? This opponent may have been a little bit tilty going into this hand. Maybe they're just feeling a little bit overly optimistic. I don't know what the case is, but worked out well here. I think the way I played it, I wouldn't change anything. The way the opponent played it, I think they were probably fine to find a c-bet. I mean, they could have gotten tricky with like a check raise on the flop or something like that. But I think just kind of just continuing to bet, and then I don't think jamming was the right move from their perspective, because think about it this way: if like hypothetically, I raise on the turn there, and then they just call. And then that scare card comes in with the jack, where that fills in straights, that fills in flushes, and I just have two pair. I'm not going to value bet the river. And you can see we both had to run it twice on. So the 9 and the jack come in. Both of those fill in flushes and straights. So, opponent's going to check there if they just call every time, and I'm going to check it back. So this pot didn't have to get as big as it did. I do think sometimes you can just try to pot control and get to a showdown. And again, another spot where opponent calls my, so it works out well for two reasons for them to just call my turn bet, right? Because, this flush draw fills in, and if I jam, that's an easy fold. Like whenever there's potential straights and flushes, and you're sitting there with one pair, you're just never going to be calling, right? Because nobody's crazy enough to float on the flop, check raise the turn, and then jam on the river as a pure bluff. People don't do that in online poker a lot. You need to have a read on someone as a bit of a maniac to be doing something like that. And I know people may be sitting there and saying, oh, well, good, loose, aggressive poker players are going to be doing stuff like that. And look, whenever you're playing against just these kind of borderline nitty, tight, aggressive opponents online, or anybody who plays like GTO poker, you're kind of just, you're basically lighting money on fire with those huge, ridiculous bluffs. Like, it just, go and play online poker, or go play against nitty people and see if that shit actually works, because it's not going to. But yeah, I think for them, whenever they're facing that raise on the turn, like I said, I think they're trying to price out the draws ultimately, but it's, people also, from my experience, will bluff once. They don't bluff twice a lot. And this is something I've probably talked about in other hand examples, where if I check to somebody on the turn and they bet, I'd like to kind of use that as a common bluff catching spot. Whereas if I check to them, and then if I check to them again on the river and they bet again big, like, it just very rarely is that a bluff. People don't bluff the river a lot. Not a lot of people have the balls to do it. So, whenever you've got a good hand with a lot of showdown value like that, like best case scenario for him on that bet, whenever he bets the turn is, I fold out my equity, or I call and I'm behind and I miss. So there definitely is logic to jamming there, but I just think, another thing too is I like to play draws aggressively on the flop, right? Because you have two chances to get there. On the turn, you only have one chance to get there. So if you have a flush draw on the flop, you have a lot more equity than you do if you have a flush draw than if you have a flush draw on the turn. So, again, I think, from my perspective, if anybody wants to comment and tell me I'm wrong, I think the jamming of the pocket aces there on the turn was an overvalue. But just kind of an interesting little heads up blind versus blind spot.